It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Angie Orpet. Angie works for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. She helps orchard and small fruit producers create pollinator habitat to enhance their production while making homes for invertebrates. She also connects to wider audiences of all ages to share the joy of insects, and hopes to help others bring more habitat into their lives because it keeps things interesting. I don't think any of us would disagree with that. Angie's coming to us from Wenatchee, Washington. She's a member of the Washington Native Plant Society, and I saw someone mention in the chat there that she's on one of the chapter boards there, which is a great service. So she's really excited to be here tonight and connect with our society. So with that, I'm going to unshare my screen and welcome to Angie.
Hello, thank you, Beth. That was an excellent introduction. Oh, all right, let me get the PowerPoint rolling here. And thank you for having me and inviting me to present. I appreciate that. And I hope everyone finds it interesting too. It would be terrible if you came away bored from this PowerPoint. So I have my title, Native Plants and Invertebrates are like two lupine seeds in a pod. And here's my example. The lupine's not doing too good off this, but it was just a feeding fest on those pods. We had blister beetles, we had blue butterflies, there were bugs. Everyone was having a good time chowing down. So I feel like, native plants and invertebrates strongly linked, even just for because having seeds and then getting those seeds eaten. It's a circle. But so I work for the Xerces Society. If you haven't heard of the Xerces Society before, it's where it's a nonprofit for conservation organization who is working to protect invertebrates via their habitat. And we've been going strong now for 50 years. So some things we do are education and outreach, like here tonight, habitat restoration, community science, and research. And we have remote staff in 26 states now. And I am based out of Wenatchee, Washington. So I'm in the tree fruit power belt. Here's a picture on the right. This is my main work area here, down the Columbia River, basically Okanagan, all the way down into the Yakima Valley. I'm in Wenatchee, and here's a picture of what you would typically see in this setting is a wall of fruit, a high-density orchard planting, apples and pears, and I also work in blueberries. So what I do day to day, or here's an example. There's an irrigation pond, and they can't plant tree fruit on it because it will structurally compromise the pond. So instead of just having a bank of weeds, we throw down some seed from native plants, and in a couple of years, you have a beautiful blooming habitat. And I'm happy because the bees are happy, but the producers are happy because out of these wonderful blooming habitats come all sorts of beneficial insects. So the lady beetles come and clean up the aphids, so then they don't have to spray. So once again, it's a win-win. So why do we care about the insects at all, right? They're just those darn mosquitoes. You have to keep swatting them. They just keep coming back. No, that's not true. We want to focus on invertebrates because they're the heart of a healthy ecosystem, right? And our fates are intertwined. They recycle nutrients. They offer that free pest control, although they also offer the pests occasionally. They are food for birds and bears, and they help create food that we eat because they help plants reproduce, which is huge for native plants, right? We can't all be grasses. So my goals today are having you get to know some native bees, what they look like, who they are, understanding the issues that the pollinators can face, and how to help your pollinators and native insects with native plants in your space by providing food and shelter. And then we're going to talk about how we scaled up this concept to a lovely farm, Vilicus, in your very own Montana, and then what you can do beyond your space to help invertebrates and pollinators. So here's our, there are a lot of different insects that visit flowers. These are the 6 main groups that contribute most to pollination. So on the top left here, we have a syrphid fly, so flies. Middle, I hope everyone recognizes a bumblebee, but I'm not going to judge if you don't. So bees, and then we have butterflies to the right, going clockwise, moths, beetles, and then wasps on the left. So out of all of these, the bumblebee in the middle and bees are the most important pollinators because they have specialized structures on their bodies that help them collect pollen, usually on their legs. And they also collect and forage for pollen for their nests, so they are visiting flowers, and they are exhibiting flower consistency, where they visit the same type. So it's like they're speed dating. They try a few things and like, oh yeah, this person's great, and they'll come back to that flower time and again because it tastes really good. So then the flower is benefiting because it's getting just pollen from its other fellow flowers, and the bee's benefiting because that nectar tastes good and it likes that, it's coming back for more. So native pollinators are very important. So wild bees there's crazy diversity, 20,000 species worldwide. In North America, we have over 5,000. United States and Canada, 3,600. Montana, right now, only about 450 are classified, but it's estimated it could be up to 1,000. Fun fact, Montana has the least studied bee fauna in the United States. So there's currently, since 2014, a Wild Bees of Montana study taking place out of MSU to try and get a better grasp on how many species you have. And then in your yard, it could be 20, 40 species. So very, very interesting. And then I will say, honeybees are an important agricultural species, just one out of the thousands. So I won't be focusing on honeybees, but all the other tons of native bees. So just letting you know. So how do bees live? Well, wild bees, about 75% are solitary, which is kind of surprising because people think of, honeybees in a colony or bumblebees in a colony. But no, 75% of those bees are solitary. One single lady out there working hard, building her nest, digging a hole, digging into a pithy stem and laying an egg, provisioning that egg. These solitary females, sometimes they do share nest entrances or are gregarious and kind of nest in the same area. And they're usually pretty gentle. They don't defend their nests and they are unlikely to sting. So yeah, pretty nice. Next we have communal bees. The females cooperate in like building a hole, but they rear their broods separately. We have semi-social. Females that cohabit together, raise their, collect pollen together, have division of labor, and then at the total other end of solitary is social, what we think of bumblebees and honeybees. They have shared care of the brood, they have reproductive caste, there's a queen and there's workers, division of labor, and then overlapping generations. So all sorts here. So here's the life cycle of the majority solitary bee. This is a mining bee. They come out in the spring, only live a few weeks. She'll come out, she'll pollinate, she'll gather pollen and nectar, dig a hole in the ground, make a nice little pollen and nectar ball, and lay her egg on top, and then she dies. And that egg develops all season into a lovely larvae and then pupae, and it overwinters and then pops out of the soil in the springtime, ready to start a new cycle. So here are some other nesting habits. So bees can either be in the ground, solitary nesting, or they can be inside a pithy stem or like an old log. They're tunnel nesting bees. So on the left here is a tunnel nesting bee and a pithy stem. You see a larvae, and then the cells are divided by leaves or wood pulp or mud. And then here's a bee coming out of the ground from her nest. So they might kind of look like wormholes, or you don't, not quite sure, but you got holes in the ground. You might think maybe it's an antlion. No, those are bee homes, or in the side of a cliff, you'll see holes. Those are bee homes. Uh, and then on the bottom left here, we have a leafcutter bee coming back with a piece of leaf lining her stem. And then on the right here, we have bumblebees like to build nests in old rodent holes or insulated cavities. So yeah. So here's an illustration of why overwintering sites are very important, because bees are all over the place and you need to provide a space for them if you can. So ground nesting bees, 80% of native bees are nesting underground. They can be found in your lawn. They can be on exposed ground with low plant cover. They usually like those softer soils, clay or loam, or, I'm sorry, sand or loam, but they can nest in clay too. You can see on the left here that cavity where the nectar and pollen ball is kind of shiny on the walls. That's because some bees excrete like a wax, or they're called polyester bees. They make kind of a shiny substance to protect that chamber. And the nest can be shallow or really deep, so you just never know. So here are a selection of bees that are ground nesters. So we have the striped sweat bee. This cute little lady is on a mustard flower here on the left. Um, when you're looking at different kinds of bees, check out their body shape, where they're carrying their pollen, what time of year they're out. These striped sweat bees are out in the summer. Their size, that's like a cosmo flower on the bottom right there. So, pretty, you can see them, they're visible. They have a diverse range of, yeah, they're called furrow bees, apparently. And then we have a small sweat bee. This one's even smaller. And they also carry their pollen on their back legs, and they can have a diverse range of sociality. And now we have the shiny metallic green bees. These are also out in the summer. The males always have a striped black and white abdomen, and the females do not, and they nest in the ground. And the females have a communal nest, so they share an entrance but have their own brood cells. Then we have the mining bees. These are out in the spring. As you can see, they're pictured, I think, probably on apple blossoms. You can find those sometimes in patchy grass, so in a lawn. They're called tickle bees. Don't ask me why. And then we have long-horned bees. I think of these bees as wearing big chaps. And the males are the ones that have the long horns, and you'll usually see them in like sunflowers. Sometimes you'll find a bunch of bees in a sunflower overnight. Those are all males, and they're all, like, gripping each other's feet, which is adorable. And then we have above ground nesting bees. So the remaining nearly 20% out of the ones who are ground nesters are above ground in tunnels or stems. They like hollow pithy stems. Some plants have pithy stems, or old beetle holes in the trunks of trees, rotten wood. I know a few of them who live under the eaves of my house. I've seen them in greenhouse walls. They always surprise you. And they partition their sections with their eggs with it could be leaves or petals. You'll see that they can be really beautiful. Pebbles, sawdust, mud. Out of those, we have blue orchard bees, they're called, osmia. And they almost look like a fly. Well, and you're like, what is that? But they're very shiny metallic. They use mud, and those are usually the ones that people put bee homes out for. It can be mason bees. They're fairly sizable. They'd catch your eye if you saw them, and they're out in the springtime. We have leafcutter bees. These are spring and summer. Leafcutter bees hold their abdomen up a lot, and you can kind of see it in this picture on the right, but they're pretty distinct if you see them. They're also really quick. They're kind of adorable, obviously. And they cut these beautiful, or depending on your garden preferences, annoying holes in your leaves if it's the right material, and they'll line their nest with those. So if you have these types of markings on the bottom right, you have some leafcutter bees in your neighborhood. Oh, and they also carry their pollen on their abdomen, underside. So another way to figure it out if you've got leafcutters. And then there has been a large carpenter bee sighted in Montana. Normally these are in more southern states. They're the size of a bumblebee, but shinier and less hairy. So it's theorized, well, is it from climate change? Are they moving more northward now, or was it in some sort of medium like firewood that it got carried over here? But so anyway, you keep your eyes out for the large carpenter bees. And then we have small carpenter bees. These are pretty small. You can see it's on someone's finger there. They nest in pithy stems, and they could be confused with a wasp because they don't have that much hair on their body and they kind of look wasp-like, but they're actually a bee. And then we have yellow-faced bees. These kind of look similar to the previous one, but they have yellow faces or little patches of white on their body. Also active in the summer. You can see they're nesting in an old, maybe a fence post on the bottom right here. And then everyone's favorite, bumblebees. They nest in cavities like rodent holes or under a pile of rocks if you got rocks in your yard, under bush piles. They have a colony founded by a queen. So in the early spring, if you see a really huge bumblebee, it's probably a queen moseying about. And they could have as many as 400 workers in their nest. And they only have one season before new queens hatch and go to overwinter, and then the colony dies. So honeybees don't make, or sorry, bumblebees don't make a huge amount of honey like honeybees. They just have enough for their colony. So. And then we have cuckoo bees. These are parasites. If you think of a cuckoo bird, it lays its eggs in someone else's nest, and then that mother bird raises those eggs. Same thing with cuckoo bees. This group is united by their behavior, not their features. But yeah. So after all those, is pointing out that some flowers need specific pollinators. So like bumblebees do buzz pollination on like the blueberries or tomatoes. So there's a linkage there. And then also some bees need certain flowers, so it goes both ways. There could be pollen generalists where they have unrelated families that they just go to all the flowers, or there could be ones that are specialists and they just have one genus or related genera. Here's examples of bees who need certain types of flowers. There are squash bees that only pollinate squash. I've had people complain like, well, my squashes never grow. I never get any squash. And I think, well, you probably don't have any squash bees. I don't know how to help you with that, but that's probably the reason. And then there's also a specific sunflower bee. So trying to come to the point of that, diverse plants need diverse pollinators because everyone has a taste for something a little bit different. And it's important to wild plant communities and their integrity to have diverse pollinators. But unfortunately, pollinators are in decline. I'm sure you guys have heard about 18% of the butterfly species and 28% of the bumblebees in the United States face a degree of extinction. Unfortunately, there's at least one imperiled pollinator in every state. So celebrated biologist Paul Ulrich described biodiversity with an analogy to an airplane. Airplanes have lots of rivets holding their wings together. And if you notice a few are falling out, the plane's probably still flying, and it doesn't make much of a difference. But at some point, when a few remaining critical rivets are gone, the crash is inevitable. So, we assume that most systems are pretty robust, agricultural and natural to withstand many species loss, but there are keystone species that can change how an ecosystem functions or which plants are reproducing. So try to prevent things if we can. So pollinators, what is taking the pollinators down, right? Well, there are many things that harm pollinators. So loss of habitat, drought, extreme weather, urbanization, pesticides, pollution, pathogens spread with honeybees or commercial colonies. So it's a hard place out there for pollinators. And it's just not pollinators that are declining, but in general, all insect species have been documented, anecdotally called the windshield effect, where fewer and fewer insects are found on your windshield when you're driving around. And it's around the world. So, for example, flying biomass of insects was down by 70% in protected areas in Germany. So, where do we go from here? Well, a large amount of research says that habitat is key to restoring pollinator communities. And if you have the habitat, the insects will come. So it helps insects be more resilient in climate change. Their immune systems are better if they have more diversity of things to eat. And we can do that by protecting habitat that's already there, but also restoring habitat where we find it at all scales. It could be just potted plants on a patio. It could be a whole farm. It could be next to the road. So things can be done. And don't dismiss cities, even though if it's high density, there's many studies supporting that gardens in all shapes and sizes can really help pollinators. So, how do we grow this habitat? Here's a lovely picture of a golden currant. I don't know about you, but as a native plant enthusiast, it's more like, where can I find space for this new plant that I have a love affair with? But aside from excitement about growing a new native plant, what exactly are pollinators looking for? Well, no matter the scale, they always need food, whether it be pollen, nectar, or host plants, shelter, nest sites and overwintering sites, and then safe haven from pesticides. So first off, prioritizing those native plants. I know, preaching to the choir here. Just giving you some more reasons to feel good about native plants. They support greater numbers of pollinator species. They support diverse wildlife. Native trees supports 4 times the amount of, let's see, 4 times the amount of biomass that a non-native would, and 15 times the amount of species of caterpillar. So like basically a native tree is a bioreactor. And apparently non-native trees decrease bird populations. Crazy. And then a note on varietals, if you can't live without your triple petal marigold. I get it, but just know that double petal varieties have been bred to have petals and maybe not so much nectar or pollen. So I say if you're a diehard rose lover, just plant some native roses while you're at it so you can have your cake and they can have theirs too. Another advantage of natives, not that you need to feel great about natives more, but they have good for soil health, good for water infiltration, those deep roots, resistance to invasive plants, resilience in extreme weather, and then you really don't have to do much to make them happy because they're already, grown in the wild. So how do we select our native plants, winnowing down what we should plant, in my case? Well, look at what you have in your yard, and are there any times that you don't have something blooming? Because you want something blooming from spring to fall. You got to set out that pollinator buffet all year long. And a handy little tool that has come out in 2023 from the USDA Rocky Mountain Research Station out of Bozeman is the pollinator scorecard. So the scientist there, Justin Runyon, put out traps, and they also tracked when flowers were blooming, and they found that there were 9 top species for Western Montana that were visited by 80% of 246 species. So pretty much if you hit these 9 plants, you're good on 80% of 246 species, which is pretty good. So take a look, and these are blooming from May through August. And here's a more in-depth, so the scorecard, so in this paper, I'll go back here, just put in "of bees and blooms" into your Google search bar, and this paper will come up. And here's a more in-depth, they had 24 species total in the scorecard. Just here's what it looked like, score on the right, species on the left, and it gives you all the details, like, okay, I want to target more specialists, I should plant this. Silverleaf Phacelia, 9 specialists were visiting that. Okay, so if you have an amazing yard full of native plants, this might help you pinpoint a few more that you're interested in. And even though this is for the western part of the state, I'm sure not all of these only grow in the western part of the state. So I'd say it's worth looking at for everyone. And then a special point out, if you're looking for a new plant to plant in your yard, plant it for the western bumblebee. This is one of those species that is under consideration for listing under the Endangered Species Act. And it's declined at 93% of its range from 98 to 2018. So it used to be quite widespread, hence the name Western bumblebee, but not so much anymore. So these are some of the plants that they found the Western bumblebee visiting, which includes an invasive thistle. So if you are into planting thistles, by golly, plant some native thistles for the Western bumblebee, and many other pollinators love thistle. So that's my plug. Also, the Xerces Society has not 1 but 2 plant lists for native plantings for western and eastern Montana, and it had some overlap with the plants found in the scorecard, but it also gives you additional details on, well, lead plant is a host plant. It has caterpillars on it. Or I have a lot of deer and they really mow through my native plants. Well, you should plant some showy milkweed because the deer aren't so keen on it. So check those out as well. This is a part of the eastern plant list. And then plant selection. There are some bees that need certain flowers, those specialists, right? So these are some species, or not species, but families that have pollen specialists. So if you're looking for a new plant to put out there, try and find a different kind of aster or willow, or because there'll be a specialist out there who will appreciate your planting that. And again, I can't emphasize enough, I wish there were more nurseries that sold native thistles. I know people think of thistles as a pest, but and then think about host plants, right? If you're trying to cultivate, I don't know, the monarch, put out some milkweeds for the monarch. Monarchs can only eat milkweed, and they're not doing so hot themselves. And then milkweed flowers are great for other pollinators. I see all sorts of critters on those, and beetles. And if you're having issues with aphids, there are specific aphids that only go on milkweeds. So the beneficial insects that eat aphids will chow down on the milkweed aphids, and then they'll come and chow down on the aphids in your other plants. So they're great for hosting beneficial insects and keeping beneficial insects. Once they've cleared out your aphids, they go back to the milkweed and kind of hang out. So they don't just die or go away. And then don't forget your native grasses. Grasses are a really important host plant for moths and all sorts of species. You can't go wrong. They're also important for nesting and overwintering sites under that like bunchgrass duff or a thatch of a rhizomatous plant. It's great. It also reduces erosion, sequesters carbon. You can't go wrong. And then also include plants that have those pithy stems, like cane fruit, elderberry rose, aster. And there's kind of a zoom in here of this person's patch of raspberries have all these holes in their old canes. Yeah. And then make sure you're buying bee-safe plants if you're going to a nursery. You don't know if they've been treated with systemic insecticides like neonicotinoids, which are pretty harmful and can last in a plant for years. So one way to get around that is just ask your nursery, do you use neonicotinoids? Or, let them know your concern so they'll be thinking, oh, maybe I should reduce sprays of that, or if people don't mind buying some flowers that have a few holes in their leaves, by golly, I'm gonna get rid of neonicotinoids. Another solution, if you don't know or you have already something in the ground, you could always put nets over to keep the bees away from the flowers till those pesticides have faded after a year or two. So, summary, it was a lot there. Focus on your native plants. Think about what grows where well. We didn't really talk about that, but that's always a good rule of thumb. Or the plant will let you know itself when it dies. Make a succession of bloom periods from spring to fall. Keep that pollinator buffet rolling. Include plants that support specialists, host butterflies, nesting materials. Try to keep your plants away from systemic insecticides and look out for those new scorecard or the Xerces plant lists. And then we have maintenance, keeping nesting and overwintering sites. So here's some pictures of what that might look like. A brush pile, a piece of dead wood. So first off, we have the ground nesters. Remember, that's 80% of the solitary bees. So, plastic mulch and landscaping fabric is great for keeping out weeds, but it also covers the ground, which is where the bees like to hang out. So if you could leave maybe some areas right underneath bushes, free of mulch, it doesn't have to be the whole yard, just leave some space. And here's a nice little ground dwelling bee in her home, checking out the scenery there. Saving the stems. So here's a nice little diagram of how you can visualize how your hollow stems will be used throughout the season. So we have winter, you're looking at your dead coneflowers and you're thinking, I should really cut those back. My yard's looking not so great, but you shouldn't. You should leave those stalks. So in the springtime, you cut down the stalk, but leave a variable height. It could be 24 inches, 8 inches. The wider the tube, a different species of bee will use it than if it's a thinner tube, right? So you could have multiple species of bee just because you cut the tube at different heights. Summer, the bees, or the spring, the bees come out, they find the tube, they start putting eggs and pollen balls down in that tube. Here we have here. Summer, those larvae are developing, eating their nectar and pollen balls. Fall and winter, the bees are pupating, they're getting ready. Spring, they're coming out of the old tubes. So you have to leave these hollow stems a whole year and wait for the bees to emerge. And then by that point, they should be probably falling over and dead because it's been dead a year. But yeah, so this is how it looks in the yard on our bottom right here. Not terribly untidy, but leave some stem there. And then also leave the leaves if you can, a thin layer in your beds or grassy area. You can use it for weed protection, it breaks down. And then don't shred the leaves because it's basically like if you put a nice quilt on your bed or versus like shredded pieces of quilt, which will be nice and warm, probably the whole quilt, not the shreds of the quilt. Basically, you're making a nice bed for those insects over the winter. And then if you need to remove it because you just can't take it anymore, take it out in late spring when everyone has gone out of the pool, right? Everyone's emerged from the ground from their hibernation. But I'm thinking by that point, your leaves are probably broken down. It's also good for, you know, decomposition. So it'll help nourish organic matter. And your lawn will grow nicely after that. Or if you have cut down a tree, leave a log. You could even drill holes in it to start the process. Just make, and it'll add some interest to the landscape. And then the last one, protect your yard from pesticides when possible. Now that you've made this beautiful habitat, pesticides are there to kill insects, and pollinators are insects, so, ergo. If you must spray pesticides, make sure you follow all of the directions on the back of the container. Don't spray your plants that are blooming, and target the plants or in the areas that have the issues, not just full on the whole yard. And then try to be selective with your product. Broad spectrum will be more harmful. And then make sure it's a nice calm day. Don't go for wind, or have a buffer. Oops. So there are some tips, but hopefully, if all things are going well and your yard is a haven, you're gonna see signs of life, which is what you want. Get used to it, because that means you're doing a great job and the native plants are in harmony with the bugs that eat them. Yeah. So once you have that, you not only will be attracting your pollinators, but those beneficial insects will come along for the ride as well. So that they'll hopefully eat your aphids. If you've got aphid problems, they'll be eating those darn brown marmorated stink bugs. Or, we have parasitic wasp on the right here, laying her eggs in stink bug eggs. Yeah, just really helpful, and increase the biodiversity in your yard. And it's so fun to watch, right? Who doesn't love watching a spider that's perfectly blended with its flower catch something that's landed on the flower? I love it. So now we've gone through what you can do in your yard. We have a large scale example with Vilicus Farms. Vilicus is the Latin for steward of the land. So that should tell you right there how awesome this farm is, because they just want to do everything right and raise food to feed us. So they grow organic heirlooms, specialty crops. I have a map at the bottom here with a tiny star of where they're located. So if you're feeling like you want to get down in the dirt, come and visit. They'd love to have you. 12,500 acres with 26% of their land in pollinator habitat. What more could I ask for, right, guys? And they're also Be Better certified, which means that it's a third party verified that they are doing things to help pollinators. And that can be on their flower, they're letting you know they're committed. So we've worked with Vilicus for probably 10 years now. And here's a lovely picture of one of their pollinator strips, Anna and Doug. And we set out with a new goal, which was to put in a blooming hedgerow. And I'm going to go through how and what we did with that hedgerow, which went in fall 2023. So planning the hedgerow, we had some goals. We wanted to retain moisture. So you can see on the left here is a bird's eye view of the field. It's pretty windy and cold there in the winter. And we have a few lines of carragana growing from the 70s, I believe Anna said was when they were planted. And they have noticed when they have these lines of woody shrubs that the crops in between do better, they have more moisture. So we should get more of that going, right? So moisture retention, catching the snow, reducing wind evapotranspiration, and then increasing bioorganic matter in the soil. And then on my end and their end, we want to see more biodiversity. So increase the amount of plants growing in this field that can help invertebrates above and below ground. And then woody plants sequester more carbon. And another goal is, can we repeat this hedgerow see how the planting and planning process goes. So I was lucky to be there when the caragana were blooming, and I saw queen bumblebees and flies and all sorts of pollinators, including this lovely butterfly, nectaring. So part of the plan was, what do we plant here? One of the challenges was there wasn't a whole lot of information on native plants in hedgerows in this part of Montana. There's a lot of stuff for wetter parts of Montana, but this would be without additional watering, dry land farming. So this was eventually the list we settled upon, and then I remember our concept, 3 blooms per season. So here's my bloom map of when things were blooming. Another thing we needed was height. A hedgerow should be a little bit taller, and some of the native plants don't get that tall, but we were curious to see how they would do if they survived. Water needs. We can't have something that's too thirsty because then it will die. Also, something that's not terribly delicious for deer. So some of the species we put less out because we knew that they were tasty for deer, but we wanted to see how it went. So this was a big experiment. And then part of that fact checking of what would grow or not grow, we use the Montana field guide from montana.gov. There's a link, not a link, but the website at the bottom of the page here. And it has this lovely, I don't know if you've ever used it, but it has this lovely density map of the species that you type in. So we have chokecherry on the left here, grows pretty much all over the state of Montana. So we planted some of that. And then the area that we were focused on is up here at the top of the state, remember, near Havre. And then green rabbit brush, or sticky rabbit brush, not so much seen at the top of the state, but we planted some, number 5 to be exact, to see how it will do. This is an experiment, right? What grows in a hedgerow on a large scale? So here was our eventual design, almost a half a mile. We decided to put in a row of caragana on the left, and then a row of native blooming plants on the right. In case the blooming natives, as it's an experiment, they didn't survive, we still wanted to be able to achieve some of our other purposes, which was moisture retention and carbon sequestration. So, yeah, so we'll see how it goes. Oh, and then here, I'll show you some pictures here. So all of our plants piled on the left here. Anna and Doug luckily had some shelter to put everything up for staging. And then we have the installation, which was a lot of work. Anna and Doug can attest to. They had many volunteers and the Montana Conservation Corps. We put up a snow fence to help catch that moisture to help the plants grow, burlap for weed cover, and then ran into a whole lot of clay, which slowed things down, but they persevered and planted these beautiful hedgerows on the left here. So the caragana on the right, and then the native plants mixed on the left. So in 2024, we're going to measure how the plants survived, the invertebrate activity, pollinators if they're out, and then get ready for another round of fall planting. So here's my plug. If there are any people on this call who want to be volunteers and help plant another hedgerow, or even just come and visit Vilicus and learn about their organic farm, and get dirty, there's the website for you. Anna and Doug would love to have you. And I will say they have kombucha on tap. So, at the end of a long, dusty day, you can wet your whistle, which is amazing. Yeah. So after, coming back from the farm, you've done stuff in your garden. We've seen it at a large agricultural scale, helping pollinators and mixing native plants. What else you can do in your community, right? Well, you can put up this nifty sign in your yard if you're inclined, which expresses that you are helping pollinators if you're having issues with ordinances like, oh, you must mow your lawn. putting out the sign helps signal that you're not just keeping your yard messy. This has a purpose, everyone. Calm down. And that you are planting things, you're helping insects having overwintering habitat. You're helping them eat all 3 seasons of the year. And then spreading the news, right? Your neighbor can learn about it. And this is a bee's eye view of the neighborhood, right? They're not just in your yard, they're in the guy next to you's yard, and they're in the park across the street. So the whole neighborhood can come together and make a nice habitat for pollinators and bring them back. Another thing is Bee City USA and Bee Campus USA. It's if a community wants to come together and say, we're going to do increase native plants, provide nesting sites, reduce pesticides, and they can be a certified Bee City USA or Bee Campus. And I believe Montana has a few of these, so check out the website, and you can go visit those areas. They usually have educational events, so you can learn more in person. Another fun thing you can do is participate in the Firefly Atlas. This just came out. There are actually 6 species of firefly, potentially, in Montana. They're all, I think, daytime flyers, so you won't see them lighting up at night like you traditionally think of a firefly, but they're just go and check out the website, and fireflies nectar on goldenrod. So if you plant some goldenrod, you're helping your fireflies. You didn't even know it. They just look like plain old beetles, right? But yeah, check it out. And then I think we talked a little bit about this, but look for the Be Better certified seal. That means a farm is like Vilicus, doing things that encourage and value pollinators. And it's third-party verified, so someone else is going out and checking that, yes, they have things that are blooming, they are using pesticides appropriately, or in the case of Vilicus, not at all. So that's something to keep your eyes peeled for. You might see it sometimes on almond milk, for example. And then Xerces has tons of books that connect native plants with insects. If you're looking to cultivate a specific kind of butterfly, or to specifically like the monarch, or a specific kind of bee, these are the books for you to check into. And then Xerces online, Xerces.org has so many pamphlets on all sorts of stuff about invertebrates and native plants, conservation, how to transition your yard from sod to native plants. And even if you're not in the Montana area, more plant lists for other regions as well. So check it out. If you have a kid, grades 3 to 5, or, even yourself, if you just want to have a fun, I know people like to do adult coloring. For relaxation purposes, we have a downloadable X Kids. It has activities about invertebrates, from freshwater mussels to bumblebees to fireflies. And it's a lot of fun. And I think it's also available in Spanish too. So English and Spanish. And then last, so it's because of donors and members of Xerces Society that I'm able to come here today. So if you are excited about invertebrate conservation, consider becoming a Xerces member today, or donate to our cause. And so final thoughts, what you do in your space, whether it's on a pot on your porch or a whole farm with 12,000 acres, is important. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit here. I'm all choked up, guys. Gardening can bring a lot of joy. It's relaxing to be in a yard, experiencing the first blooms of summer, enjoying a bumblebee on your flowers. So if you can do whatever you can to help make an inviting place for your pollinators with food, shelter, and protection from pesticides, that would be much appreciated. And you can help reverse some of that insect decline that we're experiencing. So this is a picture of me and my son, Freddie, in our front yard. We're the only house on the street that has a mulch native flower lawn. And hopefully some other people will see how beautiful it looks in a few years and want to also have these plants in their yard. So I have my contact information at the bottom. And also there is a Xerces ambassador in Billings, Sean. He offered his website and his phone if anyone has questions, or if there are events where you need someone to talk more about pollinators and do education, contact Sean and he would be happy to do that. And I do believe that is all I have. Should I stop sharing, Beth, or do you want me to leave it up?
Whoops. Sorry,
Okay.
it's muted. Why don't you leave it up for a little bit? People can
Okay.
write down your information there, your phone number and such.
Okay.
And then we could take it down in a little bit. Great. Well, thank you so much, Angie, for all this information and resources and the really cool photos of insects. That's really, really nice. And I do want to echo what Angie said about considering donating to becoming a member of Xerces. If you're interested, you can see all the resources they have. And Angie has asked us to donate her honorarium for speaking tonight to Xerces Society. So Montana Native Plant Society will be making a donation in thanks for Angie speaking to us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and with that, we have a lot of questions, so
All right.
I'll just dive into fielding them. Connie Geiger was wondering about any suggestions for resources to help identify specific bees and insects that we see in Montana.
Yeah, so I think Montana State University has a, a ton of guides on their website because that wild bee survey, they have someone who specializes in bee identification, but there's also a bumblebee's book. Ugh, ugh. Let me see if well, there are bumblebee identification books available specifically. And then there's general bee, like, what type of bee it is? Is it a osmia, that kind of thing. Those I wish I had a list of bee books in front of me. Let me see if I can go back. I'm trying to say there are a lot of resources if you are looking for them.
And I think you're right that MSU Extension has a lot. If you went to
Yeah.
MSU and Googled bees, you're going to get a lot of information about our Montana bees.
And like early in the PowerPoint, I mean, there are over half are not explained or are not discovered or described yet. So you could be seeing an unknown bee in your yard. So if you can't find it in the guide, don't feel bad.
All right. And then can you explain a little more about bees that are specific to the certain plant species? So does that mean no other insects can pollinate squash, or that squash bees only frequent squash plants and not obtain pollen or nectar from any other flowers?
Yes, it's the second one. They only obtain pollen and nectar from squash, but other insects can pollinate squash as well. It's just that the squash bee loves squash, and so it helps create your squash plants because it only goes to squash and only puts pollen grains from other squashes so that you are more likely to have a squash arise after pollination.
Right. Okay. And then Barbara's wondering how to help bees in her yard before the native plants bloom in mid-May. She says the bees use daffodils in late April, but then there's not much blooming for a few weeks, and she wonders how the bees are surviving.
Yeah. So I'd say there are I don't know if can you plant any willows? Willows are like the classic early bloomer, or Barberry, that Oregon grape, is a really good plant to stick out there. I'd say if you, during that time period, if you go out on a hike or look in your natural areas, what's blooming, if you can get that from a nursery, or even if you have a local nursery that you like, and Montana has a few really nice native plant nurseries, they can give you a plant that will fill that hole. And it could be the case that the some bee species haven't even emerged yet. So you might just be, I don't know, has Barbara seen bees out and they haven't been able to eat anything? Because it might be a case where they haven't emerged yet. With climate change, there's some disconnect between when things bloom and when insects come out of dormancy. So
I think she's mostly reflecting on what she sees blooming, but I do know, here in Southwest Montana, in the native habitats, there are a lot of flowering shrubs like chokecherry and serviceberry and the currant and stuff that they bloom pretty darn early. So
right, like red currants.
yeah.
The wax currant is a real early bloomer.
So where Chris lives, their city fogs for mosquitoes. They say that because it is sprayed at night, it shouldn't hurt pollinators in daytime. How do I talk them out of this? That's a hard one.
Yeah, I'd say it depends on what they're spraying too. If it's gonna be hanging around, but really any pesticide that, if it hits the ground and the bees are living in the ground, then the bees are gonna be exposed, right? Um, yeah, I would ask what the when does that pesticide break down? Is it gonna be longer than 4 hours? Because if they spray at night and it breaks down at 12 hours, the bees are going to emerge in the morning and still get exposed. Or if it's systemic, then that's going to be in the soil and in the water and on the flowers, and the bee is going to land on the flowers. So I would just remind them that the pesticide lands somewhere eventually, right? And the bee will also land where that lands. And I doubt that they're gonna have the whole city cut their flowers back so that the bees aren't landing on sprayed flowers.
Okay, Karen's wondering about, do all the nesting bees have the same annual cycle? All emerge as adults in the spring?
Hmm. That I don't know. Um, I don't know. I'd have to look that up. If she wants to leave her, or she wants to email me that question, I can find an answer and email it back.
All righty. Christy wondered if at Vilicus Farms you tried planting silver buffalo berry there because it's a really wonderful native shrub in eastern Montana. And then she was wondering about the material for the weed cloth in the hedgerows.
Yeah, so we thought about silver buffalo berry, but it's very tasty to the deer. And we didn't have enough time and labor to put up plant guards as well for the thousands of plants. So we didn't plant it. Um, but this is just our first round. So we'll see how things go. But yeah, we did consider it. It was just we thought it would just get mowed to the ground and wouldn't have a chance.
Yeah,
And
okay.
then we used burlap. I got burlap from Uline. You can get industrial quantities of burlap from Uline. Um, and I've used burlap in some of my other plantings, and it does tend to break down after a year, so it's not permanent. it's good if you can layer like a couple inches of mulch on top of it. But since it does break down, I prefer it for things, especially if they're rhizomatous and they're going to be sending up shoots, just to get a handle on those weeds while the plant is growing. And then eventually the plant can hold its own against the weeds. And by that time, I think the burlap and the mulch will be at lower levels.
All right. And I just want to mention that Anna Jones Crabtree from Vilicus Farm is on the call here with us, the meeting. So thanks for being here, Anna, and for all you do at your farm. And she mentioned that they're leaving the burlap in there to let it decompose because someone was asking about that. And then Gretchen wanted everyone to know, this is cool. I did not know MSU Bozeman is a B Campus USA.
Woo!
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
All right. And then Ruth mentions that some of these recommendations are kind of contrary to the recommendations that we get to reduce fire danger.
Oh, yeah.
And so how does one reconcile the competing values there?
Right. Well, so for next to your house, so if you're in a high fire risk area, I wouldn't leave the leaves. Make sure it's clean. You'll probably want to stick to like your rock mulches, and things that don't easily burn. I know some native plants are quite flammable, like sagebrush. Um, so, you know, fire spreads when everything's connected, or so if you could have islands maybe of, if you wanted to leave the leaves, have it so it's isolated, or if it catches fire, then it's not, spreading to a fence that then hits your house. Um, and other things, rock piles are excellent for habitat and bunch grasses. So you can still have habitat. It wouldn't, like my front yard there with all the mulch, you probably wouldn't want that. So I'd say isolate your clusters, or you could do some tidying up, like, leave the leaves until May, and then um, till them into the soil or get rid of them. And then when fire season comes around, you won't have that material on the ground. Um, I don't know, any other portions. I'm trying to think what other fire safe tips are there. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and certainly you're going to want to prioritize those over your your habitat diversity for
right,
invertebrates so you can make
right.
sure you survive. But
Yeah, or if you have like potted plants, put the pots
yeah, yeah.
out in the yard or further away from under your eaves.
Uh,
Things like that. Don't put them on your deck. Uh, make sure
so
if you have native trees that are blooming, trimmed away from the house. Like the classic firewise, like trim 30 feet from the ground. Those kind of things. Don't have arborvitae right next to your house.
yeah, very good. Thank you. And Christy Dubois, one of our important invertebrate people here in Montana, as well as a native plant person, she mentioned that we do indeed have nighttime glowing fireflies
Oh,
in some
really?
parts of Montana. And Christy, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and just mention something about them. So to
Yeah,
illuminate us about them.
can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw fireflies decades ago in southeastern Montana along the Tongue River, and then I've seen them along the Judith River. And then when I moved over here, of course, I hadn't seen any for a long time, and I didn't see very many. It just, I'd like, oh, there's a firefly. Well, I grew up in Wisconsin, so, oh, there's a firefly. I didn't document it or anything,
Right.
unfortunately. And in recent years, it's there's a person by the name of John Weaver. He's a retired biologist. I think he worked for the Conservation Society, and he has a ranch up in the Mission Valley, and he started seeing fireflies and got very interested in it, and now he's given some talks about fireflies recently, and he invited my husband and I up, and we got to see his fireflies a couple of years ago, and so he's kind of been coordinating with some of the firefly watch people, I think with the Xerces Society, trying to collect observations and encourage people to observe them. I was going to go out last summer and go camp out in some other places to look for them and never did. But in a nutshell, they like moist soils. And so where you're going to find them are these wet meadow habitats, and you have to get out there at night, usually in, like May and early June. And so, and sometimes when it's nice and wet, you can't drive there because the back roads are nasty. So, so that's something everybody could keep an eye out for. If you like being out at night, it's a tough time of year because the sun goes down really late at night at that time of year in Montana. But it's really worth keeping an eye out for. The Natural Heritage Program, the field guide has a couple of species of fireflies listed. That neither one is the species that John thought he was seeing there, based on their flashing pattern. And yes, we do have a lot of the non-lighting, the daytime fireflies too. They're pretty common, but the nighttime flashing ones are less common. So everybody keep an eye out for them. When you go camping, and of course it's more the lower elevation places where you're not tending to be camping and private land, but keep an eye out for them. I've heard rumors about some wetlands in the Upper Clark Fork, and so places like that. So it'd be nice to get these documented.
Yeah. Thanks, Christy. And Denise Montgomery has seen glowing fireflies in Gallatin County, and then Loretta Todd around Billings, and then somebody that was originally from the Powder River area saw them out there. And I do know the Billings one, I remember reading about it. It was recorded and documented. So that's kind of cool. But
yeah, there's an entomologist in Billings who's been involved in the firefly watch stuff too, Marion. So anyway, yeah, but the more eyes we can get out there, the better.
Yeah,
the fireflies back.
and we're getting a lot of thank yous for all this good information in the chat, Angie. And I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.